I signed for 40 barrels of salt that morning, and a girl in a wet coat told me my fleet was paying a dead man. She said it into the middle of tally day, when half of Brackenmouth stood on the quay with their hoods up and their hands cold, waiting for the Crown's books to be read and their wages counted out. Nobody speaks at tally day. It is a dull, wet, holy sort of business on the Ninefold Coast. The paybook opened on the tally shed table, the clerk reading, the rain coming sideways off the water, and my hand moving down the columns while the port waits to be told what it is owed. She was standing at the back past the fish crates, where the poor of the low docks stand because that is where they are put. She was not tall. Her coat was oilcloth gone gray with age, and her hair was pinned up out of the way like a woman who works with both hands. "My Lord King," she said, "why do you still pay a dead man's wages?" Clerk Fitz stopped reading. The rain went on. I looked up from the book. "Say that again." "Doran Hale," she said. "Deckhand, second rate. He went down on the Sable Hour 11 years ago with the rest of them. His wage is still drawn every quarter-day at the counting-house on Ropewalk. It has been drawn 44 times. There is a particular silence a crowd makes when it has decided not to be part of something. 200 people on that quay took a small step back inside their own coats. Alster Quillen put his hand on the table beside mine. He was my fleet master, and he had been my father's before me, a wide, gray, pleasant man with a voice like a warm room. "That'll be a widow's pension," he said, "easy as anything. We keep the drowned on the roll and pay their people out of the same line, kinder than a charity list. Your father's arrangement, my lord, and a good one." It was a good answer. It was such a good answer that I nearly heard myself agreeing with it. "Hale had no widow," the girl said. "He had no people. He had a bunk and a sea chest and no next of kin listed on the articles, and the articles are still in the shed behind you, third shelf, in the box with the split lid that I sewed back together in the spring." Quillen smiled at her, the way you smile at a child in a shop. "You've a good memory, mistress." "I've a good memory for stitching," she said. "I stitch the books." And she did. I knew the work without knowing the hand that did it. Every ledger in that port comes apart at the spine eventually, salt and damp and thumbs, and somebody in Brackenmouth resews them for a copper a book. I had held 100 of her repairs and never once thought about the person on the other end of the thread. "Then you'll know," Quillen said, "that a book can be wrong." "Books are never wrong," she said. "Men are wrong and then they write it down." Somebody in the crowd laughed and turned it into a cough. "I have been king of this coast for 11 years. In that time I have learned that the moment you feel the ground move under a thing you have always stood on, you must not step backward. You must put your weight down." "Clerk Fit," I said, "fetch me the counting-house register from Ropewalk, not a copy, the book itself." Fit looked at Quillen. That was the first thing. Fit looked at Quillen before he looked at me, and it took him no time at all, and he did not know he had done it. "My lord," Quillen said, "the tally will run past dark." Then it will run past dark. The rain kept on. The crowd, having decided not to be part of it, stayed anyway, because nobody on that coast has ever walked away from something interesting in their lives. Fit went for the register, and I stood at the table with the paybook open under my hands and looked down the wage column at a name I had read 44 times and never once seen. "Doran Hale, deckhand second rate, 9 silver the quarter." When I looked up again, the girl in the wet coat was gone. I found her on the low docks an hour later, on her knees on a hull. The low docks are the shallow end of Brackenmouth, where the small boats come out of the water on rollers and lie over on their sides like animals asleep in a field. The smell there is oakum and pitch and old fish. She had a mallet in one hand and a caulking iron in the other and a coil of tarred hemp over her shoulder, and she was driving it into a seam with short, fast, even strokes, and she did not stop when my shadow came over the plank. "You didn't stay," I said. "I had 4 seams to close before the tide." You accused my fleet master of theft in front of the whole port. I asked a question in front of the whole port. 2 more strokes. If it had been a small question, I'd have asked it small. Behind me, my wolves had come down the slipway and stopped, the way they do, at the edge of where they think they're wanted. There were 3 of them that day, Old Bramble with her ruined ear, and 2 of the young gray ones who follow her about like apprentices. Doc Dogs took one look and went home. The wolves sat down in the wet. The girl glanced at them and went back to her seam. Most people do one of 2 things when a Lycan King's pack sits down behind him. They talk faster, or they stop talking altogether. She simply carried on working, as if 3 wolves on a slipway were weather. "What's your name?" I said. The mallet stopped. She sat back on her heels. Her face, when she finally turned it up to me, was 30 or a little past it, wind-chapped, with straight brows and a mouth that had learned not to move much. Her eyes were the color of wet rope. "Odalie Yarrow," she said. The rain came down. Somewhere along the docks, a chain ran out and rattled and stopped. "Yarrow," I said. "Yes." Ferris Yarrow was. "My father," she said it flatly, the way you'd give a measurement. "Master carpenter of the Sable Hour. The drunk who left a garboard seam open and drowned 42 men, including your father, and put a crown on your head 11 years early. Yes. That Yarrow. I have been in 3 sea fights and 1 very bad winter, and I have never in my life wanted so badly to be somewhere else. Because I knew, standing on that slipway with the rain going down the back of my neck, exactly where the writ was that had struck her father's name off the shipwright's roll of Brackenmouth. It was in the long chest in the muniment room under the harbor hall. I knew the weight of the paper. I knew the wax. And I knew whose signature was at the bottom of it, because I had put it there myself, at 22 years old, 9 days after they carried my father's body up the beach at Cold Hallow, with Alster Quillen standing at my shoulder saying, "Sign it, lad, sign it. The port needs to be told whose fault it was. A port can bear a death, but it cannot bear a mystery." I had signed it without reading it. I remember the pen. I remember thinking the ink smelled like nothing at all. "You knew who I was," I said, "on the quay when you asked. Everyone knows who you are. You know what I mean." Odalie Yarrow picked up her mallet again. "I've known for 11 years, she said. "You've known for 11 seconds. Don't stand there expecting me to make it easy for you." Then she turned back to the hull and drove the iron in, and the sound of it went up and down the empty slip, and I stood there and let her hit it. Here is what my coast believes about the night of the wreck, because it is what my coast was told. The Sable Hour was the Crown's own ship, 90 feet, oak on oak, the best hull ever laid in Brackenmouth. She went out in the last week of autumn with my father aboard and 41 others, bound around the headland to Cold Hallow to sign the year's timber contracts with the northern holds. She never came round the headland. In the dark she came onto the 9 Teeth, a reef 3 miles off, 9 ridges of black rock that stand up under the water like a jaw, and she went down in less than an hour in 11 fathoms. 3 men lived. They came off in the jolly boat and one of them died on the beach. The other 2 said the same thing, and they said it for the rest of their lives. She took water fast, faster than a strike should give, and she took it from low down and forward. Which meant a seam, which meant the carpenter. Ferris Yarrow was not aboard. He had been put ashore at Brackenmouth 4 days before with a broken wrist. That did not matter, because the caulking was his and the seam was his and the writ said so, and the writ had my name on it. He was struck from the roll. He could not work timber on that coast again, not a hull, not a beam, not a coffin. He lived 4 more years and then he did not, and I could not have told you the month of it, because in that same season I was learning to be a king, and I had no room in my head for a carpenter. That is the honest shape of it. I want it written plainly, because everything that came after only makes sense if you understand that I was not a wicked man in this story. I was a busy one. I was a young one. I signed what was put in front of me by a man my father trusted, and I did not read it, and a family broke, and I went on to have a reign. Wickedness, at least, has the decency to know what it's doing. The rope walk register came to me that night in the harbor hall, and I read it by candle with my boots off, and Bramble asleep across the door. Doran Hale had drawn 9 silver a quarter for 44 quarters. He had drawn it in person by mark, not signature. The mark was a small hook, like a fish hook without the barb, and it was the same hook every time, and it was too much the same. A man's mark wanders over 11 years. His hand gets old. This hook did not get old. I sent for the Sable Hours articles, the crew list signed at the start of that last voyage, and they came in the box with the split lid, sewn up neat and strong with waxed linen thread, and I sat and looked at the stitching for longer than I should have before I opened it. Doran Hale, deckhand, second rate. Signed by Mark, a small hook like a fish hook without the barb. And beneath it, in the same ink in the same hand, the line for the man who had witnessed the mark, because a man who signs by mark must be witnessed. A. Quillen, Fleet Master. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did what a king does, which is the slowest and stupidest thing available. I sent for the Fleet Master and asked him. He came in shaking rain off his hat, apologizing for the hour, warm as bread. He looked at the register and the articles, and he shook his head, and he said, "Ah," in the voice of a man finding a mistake he is fond of. "There's your trouble," he said. "Hale was one of Ferris Yarrow's men. Yarrow put him on the books. Yarrow witnessed half that crew, I only countersigned. And I'd wager my coat that the wages have been drawn all these years by whoever Yarrow told to draw them. There were 4 or 5 of that sort about the yard. Men who existed on paper more than in the flesh, if you follow me. Old carpenters do it. Keeps a few extra hands in the pay column so there's coin for the drink and the tools." It was, again, a very good answer. "Then Yarrow was a thief as well as a drunk," I said. "I've never liked to say it," said Quillen. "The man's dead, but you asked." "And after Yarrow died, who drew it then?" He spread his hands. "The daughter, I should think." The candle guttered. Bramble lifted her head off her paws. "You're telling me," I said, "that the woman who stood on my quay this morning and pointed at that line in front of 200 people has been quietly drawing money off it herself for 7 years. Quillen's face did something small. Not much. A tightening at the eye, the way a rope tightens under a load you didn't know was there. "Clever," he said. "Guilt walks loud, my lord, it always has." "Get out," I said. He got out. He was not offended. He was never offended. That was the worst of him. But when the door had closed, I sat and looked at the little unchanging hook on the paper and understood, in the flat way you understand a thing you cannot yet prove, that Alster Quillen had just told me a lie so quickly and so well that he must have had it ready for 11 years. You do not keep a lie that long unless you expect one day to need it. I went to the low docks the next morning, with the Sable Hours articles under my arm. She was working a different hull, a fat little coaster with her bottom gone soft, and this time she stood up when she saw me and wiped her hands and waited. Behind her, sitting on a heap of rollers with his legs swinging, was a boy of 9 or 10 with a bandaged thumb, sorting oakum into 2 piles. "That's Cole," she said before I could ask. "He's not mine. His mother works the gutting shed and he's no good at fish." "I'm good at rope," said Cole. "He's adequate at rope." I put the articles down on a barrel and opened them to the page. "Your father witnessed this crew," I said. "Some of it, look at the hands." She looked. She did not touch the page, I noticed that, and I noticed that she looked at the stitching first out of habit, the way a shipwright looks at a keel before a cabin. Then she read. "That's his," she said of one line. "That's his, that's not." She put her finger an inch above Doran Hale's hook, not touching. "That's a made mark. See how it sits square in the space. A man making his own mark crowds the line. He's nervous, he's got a pen in a hand that never holds one. This one's centered. Somebody drew that at a table with all the time in the world. My fleet master says your father drew it. My fleet master says, she repeated, not I think. I said what he said. Then why are you here, and not arresting me for 11 years of theft? So he had got word to her. Of course he had. Brackenmouth is a town where a whisper outruns a horse. Because I read the hook before I heard the story, I said. And I want to know which one to believe, and I've decided I'm too stupid to work it out with paper. That got something out of her, not a smile, a flicker at the corner quickly put away. You want the wreck, she said. I want the wreck. Odalie Yarrow looked past me at the harbor, at the gray water and the masts, and the rain that had been going since the day before, and had every intention of continuing. She's in 11 fathom on the inside of the 9 teeth, she said. Sand bottom. She'll have silted to the turn of the bilge, but the reef will have kept the sand off her forward. You'd need to sail out on a spring tide, run 4 cables under her, take the lift off 2 hulls at low water and let the tide do the pulling, and even then you'd only get her shoulder up, and it would cost you more than the ship was worth. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since I was 22 years old, she said. What do you imagine I do out here, my lord? Enjoy the weather. And if I raised her shoulder, what would you do with it? I'd put my hands on it, she said, and it would tell me what happened. Cole on his heap of rollers said cheerfully, she can hear wood. Cole. Well, you can. She would not explain it, so she showed me, which is the honest way people of that coast do everything. There was a lugger up on the Hard that had come in the week before with a slow leak nobody could find. 3 shipwrights had been over her. The owner was on the point of burning her for the iron. Odalie walked around the hull once slowly, with her palms flat on the planking, and then she put her ear to it and knocked with 2 knuckles, a light, patient tapping that moved along the strakes like rain, and she stopped at a spot no bigger than a hand, 4 feet from the stem, well above the water line. Here. That's not where she's leaking, the owner said. She's leaking aft. She's coming in aft, Odalie said. She's hurt here. There's water in the timber from here, and it's running down inside the frame and coming out at the after seam because that's the lowest place it can find. Cut this out and you'll find the fastening gone and the plank soft round it, and I'll wager there's a nail head under the paint that somebody drove in and left. They cut it out. There was a nail head under the paint. I have lived my whole life on wolves and water, and I know what a gift looks like when it walks past. There is a moon gift in some of the old carpenter lines on the Ninefold coast, not a large thing, not the sort of thing songs are made about. Timber remembers. Wood that has been hurt does not sound like wood that has been worn. Most shipwrights get a rough sense of it after 40 years. A wood listener has it in the hands. Her grandmother had it. Her father had it. There is nobody else left with it on my coast, because the family that carried it was struck off the roll by a writ with my name on it, and after that no one apprenticed to them. I watched her put her palm flat on the lugger's side and close her eyes, and I thought, there were 4 days between my father's ship sailing and her going down, and Ferris Yarrow spent them ashore with a broken wrist, and if he had been aboard he would have heard it. That was the first time it occurred to me that the man had not been put ashore by accident. I called the council that evening and told them I was sailing to the 9 Teeth to raise the Sable Hour's bow. It went about as well as you would expect. Old Nairn of the salt houses wanted to know who was paying. Barrack of the pilotage wanted to know what I expected to find after 11 years but mud. My Aunt Hesper, who has never in her life said a kind thing to me and has never once been wrong, said, "Your father is in that water, Varan. Leave him where the sea put him." And Alster Quillen said nothing at all for a long while, and then said warmly, "I think it's a fine thing." That frightened me more than the rest of it together. "Do you?" I said. "The port's been muttering about that wreck for 11 years, put a stop to it, and I'll captain the lift myself. I know that reef better than any man alive. I've charted it 4 times. He turned his big gray head to the table. It'll want the gray petrel and the Colworth, 4 cables, the big winches off the mole, and a spring tide. 11 days from now, we've a tide that'll serve. He had it all, instantly. Cables, hulls, winches, the tide. I have thought about that moment many times since. I think he had been waiting 11 years for someone to try, and he had long ago decided that the only safe place to stand when it came was at the front. "And the Yarrow woman comes," I said. Quillen's hand was flat on the table. It stayed flat. "To what purpose?" "She'll read the timbers. She'll read whatever gets her father's name back," he said gently, "and I'd not blame her for it. But my lord, you'll be putting the accused's daughter in charge of the evidence." "Then it's fortunate," said my Aunt Hesper, in the voice she uses to close doors, "that the king will be standing next to her." Odelli refused. I had not expected that, and I should have. I sent Bosun Pike down with the offer, passage, wages, the king's protection, a place at the lift, and he came back up the hill with his hat in his hands and said she had told him no, and thank you, and to mind the step going out because the plank was rotten. So I went myself, 3rd time down that slipway in 5 days, and by then the whole port had a running wager on it. She was sitting on the coaster's keel with her supper on her knee, and Cole was gone home, and the rain had stopped for the first time in a week, which on that coast is more unsettling than the rain. "You said no." "I did." "Tell me why, and I'll go away." She ate for a while. Then she said, "Because if I go out there and lay my hands on that hull and it says the sea did this, I'll have to say so, out loud, in front of you and your fleet master and 40 men. And then my father is what your paper says he is forever, and I'll have been the one to sign it." The gulls went over. Down the harbor somebody was singing very badly and being told about it. "And if it says otherwise," I said, "then a very great man will have been very wrong in front of the whole coast," she said, "and I've lived here long enough to know that great men don't survive that quietly." "You think Quillen would harm you?" "I think," Odelli said, "that a man who can drown 42 people and eat his dinner afterwards has already answered that question, and I don't need to ask it twice." There it was, out in the open, in the plainest words on the coast. I sat down on the keel. It's not a kingly thing to do. My knees were tired and there was nowhere else. "Then I'll tell you what I'll give you," I said. "Not protection. You've had 11 years of learning what my protection is worth, and it's worth nothing, and we both know it. I'll give you the other thing." "Which is?" "If the hull says the sea did it, you say so, and I will read the finding out myself in my own voice on the quay at Tally Day, and I will say that I sent for you and that you told the truth against your own name. Every soul in Brackenmouth will hear it. Your father will still be what my paper says, but you will be the woman who said it." I looked at the water. "That's not nothing. It's the only coin I've got that's actually mine." She was quiet a while. "And if it says a man did it?" "Then I'll take the writ out of the muniment chest," I said, "and I will strike my own name off it in front of the guild that struck his, and I'll do it whether Quillen is standing there or not." "You could do that tomorrow," she said. "You don't need a wreck for that. You could just say you were wrong." That landed. It landed the way a spar lands. "Yes," I said, "I could." "Then why don't you?" And I gave her the true answer, because I was too tired to find a better one. "Because I want to know," I said. "I have not slept a whole night at sea in 11 years, Mistress Yarrow. Not one. I go out and I lie in the dark and I listen to the water on the other side of an inch of oak, and I think about my father in 11 fathom with his mouth open, and I want to know what happened to him. That's not justice. That's me. I'd like to be able to tell you it was justice." Odelli Yarrow put down her supper. "You said that too honestly for a king," she said. "I'm a poor king. Ask anyone on that hill." She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face changed and settled, the way a set of scales stops moving. "I'll bring my father's tools," she said, "not yours, his. Bring what you like. And I'll want a berth with a lock on it. You'll have my own cabin, and I'll sleep on deck with the dogs." "Wolves," she said. "They're not fussy." We sailed on the 10th of the month, an hour before dawn, with the Colworth in company and 400 fathoms of cable coiled down in the gray petrel's hold like a sleeping snake. I should say what the gray petrel is, so you understand the shape of the thing. She is a working ship, not a royal one, 80 feet, black-hulled, deep-waisted, with a great open belly amidships for timber and a crew of 19 who have all sailed with me since before the Crown. Boatswain Tam Pike has been at sea 41 years and has opinions about all of them. There were 6 wolves aboard, which is normal on my coast and which visitors find extraordinary. They lie along the weather rail in a row like sacks, and they are better at weather than the barometer. Odile came aboard with a canvas roll of tools on her shoulder and a wooden box under her arm, and the whole crew stopped work to watch her come up the plank, and nobody said a word until she had gone below. Then Pike said to nobody, "Drowner's daughter." "Say it again," I said, "and you'll swim home." He said it again, men like Pike always do, but he said it quietly and to himself, and afterwards he did not say it at all, and I have never asked him why the change. I know why. It happened on the second night. The first night was bad. We anchored in the lee of the headland because Quillen wanted the tide, and the ship went quiet the way ships do, and I went down to the deck by the mainmast where I had told them to sling me a hammock, and lay there with my hands behind my head, listening to the water go along the planking. I want to be exact about this next part, because it is the hinge of everything that came after, and I have no way of proving a word of it. 11 years I had not slept at sea. It was not that I lay awake worrying. It was worse and stupider than that. My body simply would not do it. I would go down under for a quarter of an hour and come up out of it with my heart going like a bird in a box, and I would lie and count the fastenings I could see in the dark. I had come to think of it as a debt. A man's father drowns under him, and afterwards the sea does not let him rest. That seemed to me a reasonable arrangement, and I did not complain about it, and I told no one. Bramble had it too. She had come aboard the night they brought my father's body up, and she had never once lain down properly at sea. She stood, all night, every night, on whatever ship, with her ruined ear turned to the water. That first night out I lay in the hammock and the sea went past, and I thought about a woman putting her ear to a plank, and I went asleep, and I woke because Pike was shaking my shoulder, and there was full daylight in my eyes, and the whole watch was standing around me in a half-circle looking at me the way you'd look at a horse that had learned to talk. "Beg pardon, my lord," said Pike, "but you've been under since the middle watch and we couldn't rouse you, and we were about to send for a physician, and also," he moved aside, "there's this." Bramble was lying on her side outside the cabin door, 4 paws out, dead asleep, with her ruined ear flat to the deck and her belly going up and down. 2 of the young grays were curled against her. And when I came near, she opened one eye and thumped her tail twice on the boards and went back to sleep, which she had not done at sea in 11 years, and which she has done every night since. I stood there in the daylight with the crew watching me, and I felt something go through me that I have never been able to name properly. It was not the thunderclap the stories promise. It was the opposite of a thunderclap. It was the feeling of a door in a house you have lived in all your life that has never shut properly, going click. Odile came up on deck 10 minutes later with her hair pinned and her sleeves rolled, stepped over my sleeping wolf without comment, and asked Pike whether there was tea. I did not tell her, not for 4 days. What would I have said? "Mistress, my wolf has begun sleeping outside your door, and so have I, and I believe the moon has an opinion about us. On my coast that is a proposal, and she had come aboard to raise a wreck." But Pike had seen it, and Pike had been 41 years at sea, and Pike never called her the drowner's daughter again. The squall came on the third afternoon out of the northwest, black as a bruise, with the Colworth 2 miles off our beam and the reef still a day's sail south. Quillen had the deck. He handled her well, I'll say that of him, and it costs me nothing, and we ran off before it with a scrap of canvas and the sea getting up under us in long gray walls. I was at the weather rail with a rope round my wrist when Odalie came out of the afterhatch on her hands and knees and crawled to me and put her mouth next to my ear. "Get them off the pumps," she said. "It's not the pumps. She's opening forward port side, third straight down from the whale." "How?" "I heard it," she shouted. "There's a fastening working. Every time she comes off a sea it goes, and it hasn't come back. It's got 2 hours. I have no defense for what I did next except that I did it. I gave the ship to a caulker from the low docks in a rising gale in front of my own fleet master, and I did it without a heartbeat's thought, and Quillen's face when I gave the order is one of the 3 or 4 things I will take with me when I go. They cut the ceiling planks away in the forepeak and found it. A hood-end fastening had wrung out of the frame, and the seam had begun to breathe with every plunge. An inch of daylight opening and closing under the waterline, which in another 100 plunges would have been 6 inches, and in another 100 after that would have been all of us. She was in that forepeak 2 hours with an iron and a mallet and a lamp swinging over her, and she came out gray to the elbows and green in the face and sat down flat on the deck in the rain and asked, again, whether there was tea. I have commanded men all my adult life. I know exactly how long it takes a crew to change its mind about a person. It takes about 2 hours in a forepeak. That night the wind fell away and left a great slow swell, and the sky came out very clear and hard, and Odalie Yarrow and I sat on the afterhatch with a blanket each because neither of us could face going below. She asked about my father. Nobody asks about my father. I have been king 11 years, and people ask me about the herring quota. He was a bad sailor and a good man, I said. He got seasick every autumn like clockwork and refused to admit it. He knew every carpenter and pilot and net mender on this coast by name, and he never once got mine right. He called me Ostrich, which was his own name, all the way to the end. He thought that was very funny. What did he think of Quillen? He trusted him with everything he had. That's not the same as what he thought of him. I turned my head. In the dark she was only an edge and the shine of an eye. "No," I said slowly, "it isn't. He used to say Alster Quillen was the only man he knew who had never once been surprised." We sat with that. Then I said, because there was no way to carry it any further, I signed the writ. "I know. I want you to hear it from me and not from the town. I was 22. He put it in front of me 9 days after they brought my father up the beach at Cold Hallow, and I signed it without reading it, because he told me the port could bear a death but not a mystery, and I believed him, and I wanted very much for somebody to tell me what to do. My voice went somewhere I did not send it. Your father lost his trade because I was tired. The swell went under us. The mast made its small noise. "Yes," said Odalie. That was all. She did not tell me it was all right. She did not tell me I had been young. She let it stand there in the dark between us at its own true size, and she did not make it smaller for my comfort, and I have loved her ever since for that more than for anything else she has ever done. "He knew," she said at last. "Knew what?" "That it wasn't him. He knew from the first week. He used to sit at the table with his wrist in a splint and go through it out loud, every seam he'd closed on that ship in order, forward to aft, both sides, like a man saying his prayers. He had them all. He never once found one he wasn't sure of." Her breath went out. "And he never blamed you. He blamed the paper. He used to say a paper can't be argued with, only replaced. He was very calm about it, which I think was the worst part. I would have liked him to shout." "What did he do?" "He kept his tools clean," she said. "For 4 years every week. He wasn't allowed to use them. He cleaned them anyway." she shifted. "They're in the box under my bunk. They're what I'll use on the hull." I did not trust my voice. I put my hand palm up on the hatch cover between us, not reaching, only there, and after a long time and only for a moment, she put 2 cold fingers against it, the way you touch something to see if it is real, and then took them back. "You sleep now," she observed, "at sea." So she had noticed. "Yes." "Since when?" "Since the first night out." Odilliero was quiet for a while. "Ah," she said. And that was all either of us said about it for another 6 days. We came onto the 9 Teeth at first light on the 9th, and I saw it for the first time in 11 years. You do not see a reef, you see what it does. There was a mile of flat water with the swell going through it wrong, standing up in humps and rolling over on itself, and at low water 9 black backs came out of the sea in a line, streaming, with the birds on them. Somewhere under that, on the inside in 11 fathom of green, was my father's ship. Quillen anchored the 2 hulls in the deep water inside the reef and put the divers down, and I will say this for him also, the man could work. For 2 days he ran that lift like a music master. Cables down, divers under with the sweep wire, the long grinding business of dragging a bight of chain along the bottom until it fetched up on something and then walking it under her. He was everywhere. He was pleasant to everyone. He knew every man's name. And on the 2nd evening, a boy came to me at the rail and said, "My lord, the boatswain says, will you come and look at number 3? Number 3 cable had a strand cut. Not chafed, not rusted. 16 strands in the wire and one of them cut through with a chisel, 3 feet in from the eye, where it would sit against the hull's shoulder and take the greatest strain." Pike laid it across his knees and put his thumb on the cut and looked up at me from under his brows. "That's a tool did that," he said. "How long would it hold?" "Long enough to get her up, not long enough to hold her there." He spat over the side. "She'd come up on the tide, she'd hang while everyone had a good look, and then she'd take a sea, and that strand would let go and she'd fall back into 11 fathom and roll, and the shoulder we'd raised would be under 60 ton of her own weight. And every soul aboard would say what a shame and what a dangerous business, and nobody would ever try it again." "Who's been at the cables?" "Everyone's been at the cables, my lord. That's the trouble with a lift." I stood there in the last of the light with the reef breathing a mile away, and I did a thing I am not proud of and would do again. I told Pike to say nothing, to splice a new eye onto number 3 overnight quietly, and to tell the men it was chafe. And I went and found Alster Quillen at his supper and sat down opposite him and asked him, very pleasantly, whether he thought the weather would hold. 2 days, he said. Then it comes round to the east and we'll be off this reef whether we like it or not. Then we lift tomorrow. He put down his spoon, just for a moment. The tide's better on the day after. Tomorrow, I said. And Alster Quillen smiled at me, warm as a room with a fire in it, and said, "You're very like your father." We lifted her at the bottom of the tide on the 10th, in flat gray weather, with the whole reef showing. It is the strangest work in the world. 4 cables from the 2 hulls, hove down as tight as iron at high water so that the ship sat low and hard on their own anchors. Then you simply wait, and the sea goes out from under you, and 11 fathom becomes 8, and the world's largest and most patient animal lifts 60 ton of drowned oak off a sand bottom for you without ever being asked. Nobody spoke for 3 hours. You could hear the cables. They talk, a long, low, mournful note that comes up through the deck into your boot soles. Then the water shrugged, and a great slow shape came out of the sea about 40 feet off our starboard quarter, streaming green, black with 11 years, with weed hanging off it in ropes and a dozen fish falling out of it. The bow of the sable hour. Somebody behind me made a noise. Half the crew went down on their knees, which is not a thing you order and not a thing you can stop. She came up on her side to the turn of the bilge and hung there in the shallows with the sea running off her, and I looked at my father's ship, and I did not think about my father at all. I thought, she's beautiful, even like that, even dead. Whoever laid that bow knew what he was doing. I turned round. Odalie Yarrow was standing amidships with her father's tool roll over her shoulder, and her face absolutely white. "Mistress," I said. "Yes." "Take your time." "No," she said, "I've had 11 years. They put her over in the punt with 2 men and a lamp, and I went with her, and Quillen came in the second boat, and behind us 40 men lined the rail and did not make a sound. The hull close to was a wall, weed and black slime and the great sweep of the strakes going away into the water, and the smell of it, I have no word for the smell of a hull that has been 11 years down. It is not rot. It is older than rot. Odalie took a scraper out of her father's roll and began to clean. She worked from the stem aft, a foot at a time, along the 3rd and 4th strakes below the whale, at the turn where the garboard runs into the deadwood, the place the Ritz said had opened. She cleared the weed. She washed the slime off with a bucket on a line. She put her ear against the wood and knocked with 2 knuckles and moved on and knocked and moved on, and the sound of that knocking went out over the water and came back off the reef. An hour, then 2. "The tide's turned," said Quillen from the other boat, pleasantly. "I know what the tide's done," she said without looking up. At the 3rd hour she stopped. She had come aft 11 feet from the stem, 4 planks down, and she was not knocking any more. She had both palms flat on the wood and her forehead against it and her eyes shut, and she stayed like that long enough for the man at the oars to look at me. Then she opened her eyes and said, in a perfectly ordinary voice, "Bring the lamp." The seam was closed. That was the first thing. The garboard seam that my Ritz said had been left open was tight, packed hard, the oakum in it black and sound after 11 years underwater, closed by a man who knew his work, and she went along 4 feet of it with her thumb and said so out loud twice, so the boats could hear. And 9 inches above it, through the second plank, dead center between 2 frames where no fastening had ever been, was a hole. Round 2 inches across, bored. You could see the tool marks. 11 years of sea had not taken them, because the plug had kept them, a wooden bung, driven in from the outside, sealed round with wax and tallow, and split now with the working of the hull so that you could get a finger down beside it. Odalie Yarrow put her hand over that hole, and held it there like a woman with her hand over a wound. "Say it out loud," I said. "Say it so they can hear it." She turned round in the boat, and her voice went across that water flat and clear and unhurried, and I will hear it until I die. "There is an auger hole, 2 inches, bored from outside through the second strake below the whale, 11 foot aft of the stem between the frames. It has been plugged with a turned bung and waxed. The wax is on the outside, which means it was set before she was launched or while she lay at a quay, and the plug is soft ash, which swells and holds while a ship's dry and lets go when she's been working 4 days in a seaway." She stopped and drew a breath, and it shook, and she went on anyway. "It let go at sea. She flooded forward low down from a hole no man aboard could reach and no pump could beat. The seam is sound. The carpenter's work is sound. Every inch of it is sound. The whole reef was quiet. The birds went over." "My father," said Odalie Yarrow, "closed that seam properly." I turned my head to look at the other boat, and Alster Quillen was already moving. He did not run at me. He was a great deal cleverer than that. He said to his own boat crew, urgently, in the voice of a man who has just realized something dreadful, "Number 3's parting, get us off, get us clear." And 2 of the 4 men had actually taken up their oars before Pike's voice came down from the gray Petrel's rail like a bar of iron. "Number 3's spliced, my lord, last night. Knew I on her." Quillen stopped. He looked up at the ship, and along the rail at 40 men, and then across 10 feet of green water at me, and I watched the warm room go out of his face like a lamp taken out of a window. "You spliced my cable," he said. "I spliced my cable," I said. Somebody had been at it. Somebody had, with a chisel, 3 foot in from the eye where it takes the shoulder. I stood up in the boat, which is a foolish thing to do, and did not care. You were going to let her hang for an hour and then drop her, and you were going to be very sorry about it. He was silent. And then Alster Quillen did the only surprising thing I ever saw him do. He sat down in the stern sheets of the boat and put his hands on his knees and said, in a quite different voice, flatter, older, no warmth in it whatever. He was going to sell the timber rights north of Cold Hollow. Nobody moved. "Your father," he said, 11 years ago, going up to sign it away 9 holds 300 years of it to men who'd have cut it in 20 and gone home. He'd have ruined this coast to be liked in the north, and I told him so, and he laughed at me and called me a shopkeeper. His mouth moved. "I have kept 1,100 men in work since. I have built you 4 ships. I did one thing." 42 men, I said. 2, he said. The rest was the reef. He was to lose the ship in the shallows off Cold Hollow with the boats down and the crew dry, and he was to come home shamed and the contract dead. The fool ran south in the dark to make his tide. His hands opened and shut on his knees. Hale bored the hole. Hale drowned. There is no widow. That's the whole of it. And Yarrow. Quillen looked at me, and for the first time in 11 years he looked at me as though I were a man and not a job. "Somebody had to be the reason," he said. "The port could bear a death. It couldn't bear a mystery." I heard my own words come back to me out of his mouth, and I understood that they had never been my words. "Bosun," I said, "take him." We brought the Sable Hour's bow back down onto the sand gently, on the tide, which is what she deserved, and left her there where my father is, and I have never gone back, and I do not intend to. We took 2 things off her. The bung, cut out entire with a foot of plank around it, wax and tool marks and all, and wrapped in canvas like a relic. And out of the flooded cabin under the break of the deck, in a strongbox that took 3 men and a bar to open, the ship's own paybook, swollen to twice its size, black as a brick, its pages fused solid. Odile separated them with a heated knife and a great deal of patience over 11 days, 1 leaf at a time, on the gray Petrel's cabin table, with a lamp and a bone folder and her father's tools. She lost perhaps 1/5 of it. The rest came up brown but readable. Doran Hale had signed on at Brackenmouth 6 days before the ship sailed. He had been rated deckhand, 2nd rate, and on the page for that quarter in the fleet master's own hand, there was a payment against his name of 400 silver, which is more than a deckhand earns in 9 years, entered as stores. Alster Quillen had been so careful for so long, and he had written it down. They always write it down. Books are never wrong. Men are wrong, and then they write it down. We came into Brackenmouth on a bright cold morning, with the whole port on the mole. Word had gone ahead of us, the way it does. There were, I am told, 4 separate versions of the story in the town before we made fast, and none of them was right, and all of them agreed on one point, which was that the drowner's daughter had gone out with the king and come back with something in a canvas bundle. I did not go up the hill. I sent for the shipwright's roll of Brackenmouth instead, and for the muniment chest, and for the guild, and I had it all brought down to the tally shed on the quay. The same shed, the same table, the same crowd standing in the same places with their hoods up, because whatever had been done in the open was going to be undone in the open. The roll came in its case. It is a monster of a book, 400 years of names, every shipwright and carpenter and caulker who has ever been let work timber on this coast. And the writ came out of the chest in its wrapping, and I unwrapped it myself, and there it was. The paper I had never read, with the wax and the ribbon, and at the bottom in a hand I hardly recognized as mine, very small and very careful, the way you write when you are 22 and frightened and pretending not to be, Varen Solt R. I read the writ out loud from the first word to the last, all of it. It took some time. It is a vile little document and it is only 9 sentences long. Then I said, "This is a lie, and it was a lie the day it was made, and the man who made it is in the harbor hall under guard. It has one signature on it. It is mine." I took the pen out of Clerk Fitt's hand and I struck my own name off it, and I wrote under it in front of the guild, struck by the hand that said it, in the 11th year, the finding being false, and I signed that too. Then I turned to the roll. "Master of the guild," I said, "the name of Ferris Yarrow, master carpenter of Brackenmouth, was struck from this roll on my order. It goes back on. Not entered anew, I'll not have him a new man, struck out of the striking. Put him back where he was, in his own place in his own year, between the names he stood between." The master of the guild was a small, ancient, furious person named Desai Holt, who had been apprenticed under Ferris Yarrow herself, and she took the roll out of my hands as though she thought I might drop it, and she found the page, and she did it there on the table with everyone watching, and her hand was perfectly steady. I looked up once while she was writing. Odile was standing at the back, past the fish crates, where the poor of the low docks stand because that is where they are put. She had not moved forward an inch. That night I did the hardest piece of work of my reign, which was nothing at all. I could have asked her that day. On the quay in front of the town, with the roll open and the guild standing there, and every balladmonger on the coast reaching for a pencil, I could have taken her hand in front of all of them and made her Luna of the Ninefold Coast before the ink was dry, and the port would have gone mad with joy, and it would have been the finest piece of theater this coast has seen in 100 years. And it would have been a payment. That is all it could ever have been. I ruined your family, and here is a crown against the debt. She would have taken it, I think. She had nothing else. That is precisely why I could not offer it. So I went aboard the Grey Petrel, and I sent her wages up to the low docks with a note that said only thank you. The finding is read. You owe this house nothing, and it owes you everything, and I will not use that, and I did not go down the slipway. Not the next day either. I went down to the quay at dawn, though. I could not manage more than that. There is a bollard at the end of the mole where you can sit and watch the low docks and the boats come off the rollers, and I sat on it in the dark before the light came, every morning, with Bramble beside me, and when the town began to move I got up and went and was king. I did that for 11 days. I have never told anyone how many. The town counted. Of course the town counted. There is a song about it now and it gets the number wrong. On the 11th morning I came down the mole in the dark, and there was already somebody sitting on the bollard. She had a canvas tool roll over her shoulder and a wooden box under her arm and her hair pinned up out of the way, and she was looking out at the water, and she did not turn round when I came up. "You're early," she said. "So are you. I've been here since the middle watch. I couldn't think of how to start, so I thought I'd get the sitting down part over with." I stood there with my heart going like a bird in a box, which it had not done since the first night at sea. 11 days, said Odile Yarrow. Yes. Why didn't you come down? Because I owed you your name, I said, and I have paid it, and it is paid, and it has nothing to do with anything else. If I had come down that slipway, you would have wondered for the rest of your life which of the two I'd come for. So I stayed on the mole where you could see me. She was quiet. That, she said, was a very long way round. I'm not a clever man, I'm a thorough one. Then she stood up off the bollard and turned round, and in the gray light before the sun I saw that she had been crying and had stopped some time ago, and had not bothered to do anything about it. I'll tell you what I've been doing for 11 days, she said. I've been sitting in my father's chair with his tools on the table trying to want to leave. I've been offered work in 3 ports. Cold Hallow wants a yard master, and they don't care whose daughter I am. They've seen the finding. I could go north and never hear the word Brackenmouth again as long as I live. She lifted her chin. And every night I go to sleep and it's fine. And every morning I wake up and I know exactly which bed on this coast your wolf is lying outside of, and it isn't mine, and it should be. The tide was coming in under the mole. I remember that. The small slap and suck of it on the stone. Say the rest, I said. My voice was not steady. You know the rest. You've known since the first night out. You slept. I slept. 11 years and then me. She said it almost angrily. I don't know what to do with that. I'm a caulker. I've a rented room and a box of tools, and half the town still calls me the drowner's daughter out of habit. And I'm not going to stand in a hall and let a lot of people in good coats tell me I've been chosen. Then don't, I said, choose. That's the whole of it, Odalie. That's the only part that was ever yours to do. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she put her hand out, palm up, in the cold, the way I had put mine on a hatch cover in the middle of the sea, not reaching, only there, and I put mine into it, and she closed her fingers. I would like to tell you that the sky did something. It did not. The sun came up over the headland the way it does 200 times a year on that coast, gray going to gold, and the gulls started, and somewhere behind us a chain ran out and rattled and stopped. But when I turned her hand over an hour later, there was a line across the palm of it, a thin pale line, straight as a chalked string, running from the base of the thumb to the outside edge. A scribe line. It is the mark a carpenter snaps across a board to show the cut. There is the same line on mine. It came up in the night and neither of us felt it arrive. Of all the ways the moon might have chosen to mark a lichen king and his mate, it chose the mark a carpenter makes to say here, and no further, and true. I have stopped being surprised by things. She would not have the hall. We were married by the harbor master at the end of the mole at slack water with 41 people present, because 42 would have been unbearable, and Dessau Holt of the guild stood witness, and Cole from the low docks carried the ring on a bit of tarred line and dropped it once and caught it, which everybody agreed was the best part. She would not be Luna in a palace either. She is Luna of the Ninefold Coast, and the coast knows it, and the wolves settled it before the council did. Bramble simply moved, bag and baggage, to the outside of her door and has never moved back, but Odalie Yarrow keeps her hands in the water. She is Timber Warden of Brackenmouth now, which is an office I invented for her, and which the guild has since made permanent and hereditary and taken entirely out of my control, as guilds do. Every keel laid on my coast she walks. Every hull that comes off the rollers, she puts her palms on and her ear to and knocks with 2 knuckles, and if she says no, it does not float, and I have no vote in it. She has 11 apprentices. The gift, it turns out, can be taught to about 1 person in 9, which nobody on this coast knew, because for 11 years the only woman who could teach it was not allowed to hold a mallet. Alster Quillen was tried by the law of the coast, which is old and slow and takes no notice of kings, and the finding was made on the bung, the paybook, and his own words spoken in a boat off the 9 Teeth in front of 6 men. His daughter Seren was called, and she was asked whether she had known, and she said no, and was asked whether she had wondered, and there was a very long silence in that hall, and then she said yes. She has never asked me for anything since, and I have twice tried to give it and been refused. She lives at Cold Hallow and runs a good yard and does not use the name. I am told he is well. I do not ask. I changed one thing about Tally Day, and it is the only law of mine that anybody will remember. The paybook is read aloud on the quay in the open in the rain, and the reading begins with the dead. Every ship's roll on this coast starts with the men lost out of that hull, read out by name, in order, with no wage set against them, and the port stands still while it is done. It takes a long time on some hulls. It takes no time at all on most. That is rather the point. And on the fleet's own roll, first of all, 42 names. I read them myself. It is the one piece of the work I have never handed to a clerk. Then the shipwrights in their order, out of the roll of the guild, and 11 names down that list, in his own place, in his own year, between the names he stood between, there is a master carpenter of Brackenmouth who never sailed on the ship he was blamed for. The clerk does not read that one. She reads it herself out of the crowd from where the low docks stand, in a voice that carries the length of the mole without ever being raised, the same way she said everything else to me, plainly, in the rain, in front of everyone. Ferris Yarrow. And then she says here and answers for him, and the tally goes on.